The latest findings on human trafficking around the world are out. On Thursday, the State Department released its annual Trafficking in Persons, or TIP report. Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey, who helped form some of the nation's human trafficking laws some 20 years ago, says it's a tough but fair report. He says China continues to own the worst human trafficking rating of major nations in the world, scoring a Tier 3. Hong Kong, increasingly under the thumb of the Chinese government, is almost as bad, landing on the Tier 2 watch list. This year, for the first time, the report identified some governments as complicit in trafficking. In addition to China, those governments include Cuba, North Korea, Russia, and Afghanistan. Their poor status in the TIP report could trigger sanctions and aid cuts. Joining us now with more is Linda Smith. She's the founder and president of Shared Hope International and a leader in the fight against human trafficking. Linda, thanks for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
This year is the first year that the State Department has named governments that are complicit in human trafficking. Will that make a difference in calling them out, especially if the U.S. puts sanctions and aid cuts into effect?
Well, many of those countries, there's already diplomatic issues beyond this issue, but I do think that they do not want to be called out. So I just think the report itself does make a difference. It also calls attention to the human rights violations all over the world that have tended to not be addressed. You know, China has most favored nation status. There's some things that some of us just don't agree with when they have these huge violations of human rights.
This is the 20th year that the State Department has issued this report. What's your take on how effective it's been?
It's been very effective. I started with the very first one. Shared Hope International did some of the investigations of countries by going in to see what it really looked like in another corporation called Trafficking Markets. And we were able to see what it, the issues in trafficking. Calling the different countries out on those has been a long process. I think the biggest issue right now is that the world does not want to accept the fact that the demand for commercial sex is driving the market. So you'll even see in this report both Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Richmond are kind of light on their statements. They talk about how the traffickers are victimizers, but and to prosecute, but then in their statements, they do not mention buyers. So from the beginning, we've had a hard time with society considering that buyers demanding sex, especially with vulnerable children in the United States, are driving a market. And if we do not focus on them, we will have expanded markets worldwide. Some of the countries still have legalized prostitution in their countries that legalizes it to buy and sell individuals. Now, America doesn't have that except in some isolated places, but we believe at Shared Hope that that is facilitating, encouraging trafficking. So the government should be downgraded for that. But I see again in this report that demand is underemphasized, and unfortunately, countries that legalize the sale of vulnerable individuals are not downgraded. Many of them are still and a level 1.
Linda, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, you mentioned him, noted that the pandemic may actually be helping traffickers because there's more people right now who are vulnerable, and so it's easier to exploit them. What are you seeing?
Yes, I'm going to focus on America on this particular question because even though we have people around the world, we mostly have them pretty isolated in the villages that we run to keep them safe, like in India. But in America, what we find is the online sales, the activities, the stings. There's even more, usually men, than ever shopping for children. So the children are online and the traffickers are online. So all of those apps that kids play around with thinking they're safe are very, very dangerous. And so we're seeing an increase. And I think most of our partners and others that we're talking to are seeing an increase. Buyers don't seem to be afraid of going and buying sex with someone. And in our case, we focus on children in America in this pandemic. I guess if you don't care about a child enough that you would go buy sex with them, you probably don't care if you give them a disease or maybe if you get one.
All right, Linda Smith of Shared Hope International. Thank you, Linda, for your time and information.
Thank you.